Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to SETI Live from the SETI Institute in Mountain View, California. My name is Simon Steele. I'm the Director of Education Outreach at the SETI Institute, and we're going to talk about Mars. In fact, everybody's talking about Mars at the moment. We've got the Perseverance rover landing happening in 2 weeks' time on February the 18th. We'll be doing some special events from the SETI Institute about that, and please take a look at our website. But today we're going to talk about other aspects of Mars because it's a big planet and there's lots of stuff going on around it. Welcome, Janice Bishop, planetary scientist here at the SETI Institute, who has just published some results on landslides on Mars. Your publication has just come out in the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, Science Advances, Janice. And the title of the paper, which you can decipher for us, is Martian Subsurface Cryosalt Expansion and Collapse as Trigger for Landslides. Would you like to tell us about that?
Hi, Simon. Sure. I'm happy to be here. And on behalf of my co-authors, we're excited about our project, and I'm happy to talk about that today. So our project is sort of, it's based on field work in several places on the Earth, in Antarctica and Atacama, and then some lab work and looking at what we're seeing from Mars as well. So the cryosalts that we're talking about, that refers to salts in the regolith on Mars. And of course, Mars is colder. So we did some experiments at low temperatures.
So cryo, of course, means cold, and salt. What do we mean by salt? I mean, I think of salt as stuff I put on my French fries. What salts are we talking about here?
That's certainly one of them. NaCl is halite, and that's found in a number of settings, in Antarctica and several of these sites. And what we're seeing is that places that have chlorine salts, sort of calcium chloride or sodium chloride, they interact with sulfates, which can also be considered as salts. And all of these are a little bit reactive in soils, but when you get them together, then they're more reactive. So that's what we found is interesting. So in some of these places, like in the Dead Sea, you see collapse of the sediments. Maybe I'll bring up a couple of pictures. Yeah. Okay. Let's just start with that one.
And while Janice is bringing out the picture, we welcome information on where you're listening and watching in from. Of course, we'll be turning our questions over to you about halfway through the SETI talks. I noticed we've already got people tuning in from London and South Wales and Texas, so welcome.
I'll show a few of these images. This one is from the Dead Sea, where you can see sinkholes forming, and that is because of interactions with the salts and the gypsum, the chlorine salts and the gypsum below the surface. So there's soil across the surface and sediment, and down a couple meters, these salts are interacting with the groundwater, and then they're liquefying, and then it's collapsing the soils from the surface.
What sort of scale do we have here?
These are on the meter size scale, each of these depressions. So they're pretty large features.
Okay.
And let me show, here's something else. We also see some cave collapse. And there are a lot of caves with carbonates that are really stable, but some caves with sulfates are less stable. And so if chlorines get in the water too, then it causes some of those to collapse. And also we see upheave of these sediments. So I'm going to show, this is an interesting picture from Antarctica. You can see, and this is one that I actually didn't include in the paper and hasn't been any of the press releases. I found this today when I was looking around. I thought, oh, why didn't I show this before? So,
is that your boot?
It's not my boot. I wish this were my boot. I want to go to Antarctica. Yes. But a few of the co-authors on our paper have been, and Everett Gibson from NASA JSC has been there and collected a number of the samples that we studied here. And this is, I think, his boot, although I'm not sure. It could be somebody on his team. They went there a while ago, but you could see these sort of puffy things. This is sort of salt frost heave there. So there's salts below the surface in these sediments in Antarctica. And as they contract and expand, then it pushes up the surface.
Okay.
So that's kind of a cool thing to see.
And this has to involve water, does it, in some way, or frozen water in either in frozen or liquid form? What's the relationship here with water?
Right. There needs to be some water, and Mars is super dry. So the surface in particular is really dry and cold and harsh and windy. So there's no water on the surface.
Yeah.
But below the surface there could be some. And in some at the poles on Mars, of course, there's water ice. So there's plenty of ice and H2O water ice and other kinds of ice, CO2 ice. But as you get away from the poles towards the equator, the situation changes and it's really dry towards the equator. And the mid latitudes, like where the Phoenix lander landed, there's ice below the surface. So when the scoop of Phoenix dug down, then the blocks of ice were observed. But in the equatorial region where we see more of the landslides and the RSL, in that area, we don't expect frozen water in terms of big blocks of ice. Instead, we expect permafrost, so frozen soil with tiny bits of ice in it. So it's a different, not a block of ice, but it's more of a frozen soil.
Okay. Now you mentioned RSL, and we need to expand that into a term which is new to me. I'm not a Martian geologist. As recurring slope lineae. Say a little bit more about this. And is this a Martian thing, or is there an Earth equivalent? You have been talking a little bit about Antarctica and Chile.
Yeah, mostly, I think the term was developed for Mars, and I don't know who coined this term. It could have been Alfred McEwen, because he's done a lot of work on the RSL, recurring slope lineae. But the idea is that you get these strange dark streaks, and they reappear seasonally in the same area, or they kind of grow. All we know is the snapshots that HiRISE gives us. So HiRISE is a camera in orbit on Mars, and so when the HiRISE team was looking through these images, they saw these little streaks and they thought, oh, wow, what's that? Maybe there's water running down the hill. And then we'll go capture it again and see if it's still there. And so by the time they could get the orbiter in the right place to take the picture again, some months had gone by. But then over years, they've tracked these and found that many of them do appear in the same place. And over time and research, most scientists agree now it doesn't look like water is involved in these on the surface. There's some areas that look like water could be involved, but in general, it's probably not. And other people have looked at frozen CO2 or other kinds of theories, but it sort of appears that the liquid water theory is not working and the dry theory is not working. And so we came up with a hybrid model, and some others are also working on other hybrid models. But our hybrid model is that there's water interacting with the salts below the surface, and that's causing uplift and collapse and these voids and this strange surface texture, and that then this vulnerable surface texture is on the surface in this place where salts are there below. And then when a dust storm comes, it scours the surface and makes this more fragile, and then dumps dust on top, and this fragile thing just collapses and starts the flow.
So it's destabilizing just below the surface, and then the weather features on the top sort of knock it down, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. It's like building a tower of blocks, and then your toddler walks by and knocks it over.
I know what that's like. So these are observations. The Martian observations are by the HiRISE camera, which is on Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is an orbiter. Obviously going around Mars, and so this is an orbital analysis of the surface, isn't it? This isn't something that's been seen from the ground by any of the rovers. So you've really got to look at these from a great distance, and so that leads to a little bit of a challenge, I imagine, in determining what's happening. Could you actually show an image of one of these RSLs?
Sure. Yeah. Let's bring that up. So.
And again, while Janice is doing that, we got people listening in from Alaska, Netherlands, Cork, Chile, South Africa, Vancouver. Welcome everyone to SETI Live.
I'm trying again. It didn't open properly. Okay. I think that's working now. You should be able to see. So there are these dark streaks that are kind of growing across here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but these dark streaks are growing and then vanishing. And this is showing over time. In the same location, HiRISE has taken 6 images of the same spot. And so you could see these dark streaks sort of as the material flows downstream.
So the stuff on the bottom right is high ground, and the top left is low ground, and so we've got stuff falling at 11 o'clock, if you like.
Rolling downhill. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
towards 11 o'clock. That's right.
Yeah. And again, what sort of scale have we got here? If we were looking at this, how far is this flowing?
I think each of the streaks are like 20 meters or so.
Okay.
That's what I recall. I don't have the scale up with me right now, but I'm guessing that that each of the flow lines, they're typically 10 to 20 meters.
Okay. So this is very, very high resolution, isn't it? This is looking, the size of a park rather than the size of the Grand Canyon in terms of scale here.
Right. This is pretty zoomed in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And HiRISE actually can see things down to 20 to 30 centimeters at their best resolution, but typically they use more about a meter scale to look at rocks and features on the surface. Whereas the CRISM spectrometer, which I'm more involved with, has the best resolution of 18 meters. So we've tried to pair these together. So HiRISE sees these cool features. And then with CRISM, we try to look at them, and we're averaging such a larger space that it's really hard to see any changes in the mineralogy. So usually there's some differences in brightness, but it's been really hard to actually pick out differences in composition.
Yeah. So I mean,
we need a view on the ground. We need
yes,
a
you need.
Yes.
we'll come back to that. So it's very clear from from that image, the stuff is sliding downhill. You can see that. But you also mentioned that this is to do with salts, and of course, again, you can't go there and take a test tube and do a chemical analysis. So is the information about the chemistry also from orbits? You mentioned that there's using spectroscopy.
We do have information from orbit on the chemistry, and there have been different kinds of spectrometers. So there's a gamma ray spectrometer that's measuring chemistry globally across the whole planet. And then there's a thermal emission spectrometer that's detecting chlorides. And then people have looked at the visible near infrared spectra from CRISM. So there are a lot of different instruments attacking this question together. And in some places, we see higher abundances of chlorides, maybe 10 or 20 or 25%, which is really high. And those are unusual places. In most places on Mars, it's down to the sort of 1, 2, 3, 4%. That's sort of the 1 to 2% is probably more common. And we see that everywhere. So every rover that's gone and scooped up soil and tested it, it's had about 1% of some kind of chlorine salt. Right. That could be calcium chloride, or it could be table salt, sodium chloride, or it could be a perchlorate, which they think is an oxidant. So any of those could be present.
What's this image now you've got up?
So this is some soil from Antarctica, and there were several soil pits dug there where we could look below the surface. So the pebbles at the top are the surface. And then if you dig down, you see the soil, and this is about 3 to 4 centimeters below the surface. You kind of see a white band, a white layer, and that's where some salts are present. So we saw this in a few places in soil pits in Antarctica, and that led us, so our whole project sort of evolved out of work in Antarctica. And we found these salts below the surface then, and that got us really thinking about the interactions of the salts in a really dry and cold environment like on Mars. And these are frozen in the winter. And in the summer, the permafrost is maybe 2 feet down or so, or it sort of depends on where you are. But so the upper part of the soil is not frozen in the summer, and it might be frozen in the winter. But in any case, these salts then can be migrating around. And so we looked at these, and then we actually developed some lab experiments, and I'll show, this is the kind of spectra that we're doing.
So what you're trying to do, Janice, here is basically recreate Mars in Antarctica or in the lab, because you can't actually get there and dig around. You've got to go and dig around somewhere that's slightly closer and maybe marginally more hospitable.
That's right. And we, as scientists trying to study Mars, we go to all the field sites, and there's several different ones that are more like Mars in some ways. Some are really salty, some are really dry, some are really cold, some are basaltic, and some have higher salts. So it's hard to find any one analog on Earth that's just perfectly like Mars. That's, we're not Mars. So,
yeah.
So then we take all these clues from the field, and then we try to build lab experiments to try to understand the missing parts from the field. And these are some spectral results, and I don't want to talk about this too much. Just the blue line is the frozen water, and the red line here is the frozen chlorine salt. And then the brown orange lines show changes in these features. So I just wanted to show that at -90, we have a snapshot of the spectrum, and then it changes for -40, and it changes for -20 and +20. So the point here is that at -50 to -40 degrees Celsius, which is really cool, this is like -70 Fahrenheit, I think, we're already seeing the frozen water in the soil liquefy, and that's what's really cool. So it's not melting at zero degrees or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. It's melting way below zero, which is really cool. And so other people have looked at modeling like an ice cube with salt on it before. And so we know that salts depress the melting temperature, but what's different about our experiment is we took a soil. So we took a Mars analog soil, and then we froze that. And then we looked at changes as it started warming up. And so that was what was really cool. So we were really excited to see the same process happening for the soil instead of just a simple ice and chloride system.
Yeah. So water on Mars is pretty much accepted now. We've got no problem with that. Does it say anything about habitability of Mars, either now or in the past? Does this give you some clues as to, compared to, say, when in Antarctica, I imagine, where you've got the similar setup, there's probably microbes everywhere as there are on Earth. How does this look for Mars? Is this something that's related to habitability or not really?
Well, I think it could be in some ways, not so much for today, because the salts that are necessary to make the frozen water liquefy would be toxic to microbes. So the really salty conditions necessary for that melting would preclude the possibility of life today on Mars. So in these environments. But what our whole subsurface salty chemistry seems to be telling us, the story is that Mars is more active in general than we thought before. So the surface is cold and harsh and dry and not too interesting from a chemistry point of view, from physics or other things. But from chemistry, the chemistry might be occurring subsurface. And if we think back in time, so early in Mars's history, about 4 billion years ago, we had liquid water on the surface. And then over time, that water vanished. And so we don't really know that history. And so our experiments are telling us that perhaps a lot of this liquid water was available below the surface, and not just at the poles or high latitudes, but maybe we had more liquid water ice systems below the surface for a longer period. So maybe 3 billion years ago, or maybe 2 billion years ago, there was more water ice below the surface, and potentially that could have supported habitable conditions later than the surface.
Okay. So we've got a few questions coming in, which is wonderful. We've got more people listening in from Quebec, Poland, Czech Republic, all over the world. So welcome. Before we start, and we'll address this, it looks like it's a very dry chocolate latte. I will I will mention that we have a special competition coming up. Called the Mars Valentine Fundraiser. And this is to celebrate the upcoming Perseverance rover landing. The SETI Institute is raffling off an exclusive conversation with two scientists who research Mars. And I believe, Janice, are you one of those scientists?
I'll be participating in discussion on February 18th during the landing.
During the landing, that's right. Yes, yes. So we have discussion during the landing, but this is another exclusive conversation.
Yeah, and I haven't been told about that, so
okay.
I don't think I'm involved in that. But I'd be happy to.
So going back, yes, you can enter a raffle via the link that's going to be shared in the comments, and anyone who enters the contest will receive a free ebook on Mars that's just been produced by the SETI Institute. So that's a very nice thing, and 4 will get tickets to the exclusive conversation that may or may not be Janice. So nevertheless, Janice, as you said, you'll be involved in the landing special that we will have at the Institute on the 18th, which is really cool.
Yes, that's right. I'm so looking forward to that landing. That Perseverance will be really exciting.
Yes, it really will be. And no, tell us more. What have we got on screen here?
The latte you described. I haven't thought about it in that term, but this is a lab experiment we did in order to check on a small scale if we see the kinds of crust formation, upheave, and collapse that we saw in the field at the Atacama and Dead Sea and Antarctica. And so I'll just play this little clip. So we added water to this system. Oh, I'm going to stop this for just a second. I put some soil and then some salts and then more soil in the system. And the salts include a calcium chloride salt and a sulfate salt that's an indicator. So when the sulfates are blue, they're dry, and when they're pink, they're wet. So you can see there's a little pink here. So this is adding water, and it sort of gets soaked up by the volcanic soil fines. And then this is at the end of the experiment where we saw blue material on the surface and sort of pink material at the bottom. And I'll just go back briefly. So this is this dry powder, and we used a straw to get the water to go down to the bottom because we wanted to try to mimic on Mars where the water's coming from below and not from the top. And so you can see the water, it's getting moist in the bottom. And then because it forms this hollow, then we can see inside on the crusts forming, and you can see gaps here. So there's crust on the surface and gaps and collapse. So even on this small scale in the lab, we're able to see some of the same features that we see in the field, where we see upheave of the ice and salts in Antarctica and collapse of these sinkholes or caves collapsing. And maybe these are related to these slumps on Mars. So we see places where there's just sort of a slump of material or a landslide. So the RSL and other features.
Now this is, although you'd like to have a rover go around these areas, I don't know if it's the sort of area you'd want a rover to go around. Is it rather sort of precarious? I'm going to get my rover to drive in over that.
Yeah, and I think on Mars, my impression of these RSLs isn't that they're dangerous. I think it's a slow dribbling of these grains downhill. I mean, we're seeing changes over months. So I don't think it's like, woof, a huge landslide. I don't think it's something that's going to swallow the rover.
Right.
But like this view now, this is from the Atacama, where they're gypsum and halite together, and gypsum dissolved and left this big gap here in the soil. So that kind of thing might be a little dangerous. You can see it for scale on top.
Yeah. I just had a correction that the two scientists on the raffle are going to be Pascal Lee and Natalie Cabral, who are going to talk about the Perseverance rover landing. However, on the live presentation, it's going to be you, Janice. So that's really good.
Oh, but Pascal and Natalie are both engaging, fun scientists. So go for it.
It'll be good. Definitely into that raffle. One of the questions actually is interesting. One of the first that came up is just talking about your background, Janice, and what got you interested in general in Mars, but also what you've got is a very, very specific area of research, and what sort of drew you to this sort of study of this chemistry on Mars.
Well, I started studying chemistry in college. I you know, as a young person, I think it's best to open up your mind and think about, you know, a lot of areas. And I was thinking about chemistry or maybe physics or maybe biology, but I hadn't really heard about geology too much. So I started in chemistry, and then I was paired up with the Dean of Earth Science for an advising program, and heard him talking about all of his field work. And I was just so fascinated. I was like, oh, wow, I have to learn about this. I have to go on one of these field trips. And so I got a master's in earth science, and that was really fun. And then learned about remote sensing, which I hadn't heard of before. And I loved spectroscopy in the chemistry lab. And then to find out that you could do spectroscopy from an aircraft or from a telescope or from an orbiter, I was like, wow, that's so cool. And so that's what I did my PhD in then. So it's still a combination of lab and field and orbital, but doing lab experiments in order to understand the spectra that we see from orbit, from the CRISM spectrometer or from other spectrometers.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about life on Mars, of course. Is there any evidence from chemistry that suggests there could have been life in the past? Or maybe to turn it around, what sort of evidence would you be able to see from spectroscopy? You know, whether it's from orbit or probably more from a future rover, because you'd need that sort of resolution.
Well, the upcoming rover, the Perseverance rover, Mars 2020, will be looking at the soil and they'll be using Raman and some other techniques to look at organics that might be present and evaluate if these are organic molecules that could just be present through inorganic reactions or if they might be biologic. And so the site that the new rover is going to is called Jezero Crater. And this has sort of a delta, and they think that it has a lot of chance of finding if there was life anywhere, that maybe this would be it. So so they're going to look. And one of the tricks about finding evidence of life is that a lot of inorganic reactions can produce the same things. It's just that life makes them go faster. So a lot of these reactions that are really slow and might not ever happen on Earth because, well, on Earth, we have a lot going on. We have a warmer place. We have a lot of water. But on Mars, we don't have that. So if life were present, it could make a lot of these reactions go faster. And we had a huge debate a couple decades ago with the Mars meteorite, the Allen Hills 84001, because some people thought there were tiny little magnetite crystals that looked like they were produced by life. And certain kinds of microbes can produce magnetite crystals. And so there was a debate in the community, were these particular ones created by life or were they inorganic? And that debate went on for a long time. So I think most scientists today believe they were probably inorganic, but still nobody knows really. So one of the key things with Perseverance is collecting samples in a cache that will be brought back. And when we can bring the samples back to Earth, then we'll know. Then we'll be able to test them. So it's going to be really hard to know with a rover. I mean, depending on how obvious it is, but I'm guessing that any signatures from long ago will be difficult to identify on a rover. So
yeah. So what you're saying is that there are two options here. Either you go to Mars as a human, as a scientist to dig around, or you collect the stuff and bring it back. But the fact you need this sort of hands-on experimentation that a rover and orbital data will not actually give you.
I think it's much easier to be a field geologist on Mars and have the human experience and see the setting and make decisions a rover can't make. And one of the things that Perseverance will have is the Ingenuity helicopter. So that'll be able to fly above and see. So it'll add sort of an extra pair of eyes and an extra perspective on where Perseverance is going. So that might help Perseverance make better choices in terms of where to drive, what to measure, and then it'll be able to dig a little bit. And in some places on Mars, we found interesting things below the surface, but I don't know if it'll dig deep enough to find the kinds of chemistry we're talking about in this project in particular.
Yeah. There's a question here about caves, and of course, you'd like to be able to get underground in some ways to see what's protected below the rather hostile surface. And we can broaden this. What sort of mission would you like to see, and where would you go? Let's throw budget out of the window for now.
Well, my favorite place is Mars Vallis, and this is a giant area with tons of clays. And for me, thinking about the origin of life on Earth too, I think clay minerals are an important part of that whole process. And everybody has their own opinion, but I think clay minerals, and especially the smectite clays, it's the kind of swelling clay. So the mineral expands and there's water and molecules in between. And a lot of companies use this montmorillonite clay, which is one of these swelling clays, for chemical reactions, just because they work so well. So if it works well enough that a company is using this as an industrial process, then it works really well. Yeah. And so I think if life existed on Mars, a good place to go look for it is where we see a lot of these clays, these smectite clays, and that's at Mars Vallis. So there's probably the thickest outcrop of these swelling clays, these smectite clays, and they also have changing redox conditions there. So they're unusual transitions from ferric iron to ferrous iron. So Fe2 plus, Fe3 plus transitions. And also there's some salty regions in between some of the clay layers. So I think it's just a fascinating place with tons of clay and interesting salts and energy from the change in redox of the iron. So that's where I would go, and maybe we will, and so far we haven't sent her over there, but maybe that'll be up one day.
Okay. Well, just a couple more questions, but just want to say to everybody, we have a SETI Talks event on February the 17th. That's the night before the Perseverance landing. And the conversation will be about strange and intriguing exoplanets. Now, exoplanets, of course, are planets orbiting other stars than the sun. We're still talking about Mars, which is orbiting our own sun, and not too far away as well. One of the questions was about finding life on Mars and how could you tell whether that is independent of life on Earth? Because these two planets are close enough that, as you say, there's the ALH 8400001, is it 001? That was a Martian meteorite. That that it's possible that you can have life traveling through space and surviving. Microbes are pretty tough little things, aren't they? What would you be looking for to say if if these sample returns from Mars, had evidence of life? How would you say, well, this is not related to us at all? A definite second start.
Oh, you mean from Earth microbes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we try really hard. NASA tries really hard to sterilize everything before they go, and of course, it's always possible, and that's why there's also concern about sending spacecraft to places that have ice, like the poles where there's ice on the surface. Because what if, despite all the cleaning attempts, what if something got through and you brought Earth microbes to Mars and dumped them off in the ice caps? Now it's going to spread probably. So, so that's an issue, and it's always a challenge. But they do a really good job of sterilizing everything before, all the parts and everything before it gets there. And of course, there's the radiation on the way, and that could kill a lot of things too. Some colleagues at NASA Ames are actually studying the effects of radiation on microbes. So there have been some experiments in the space station to try to determine what happens to microbes in space when they're subjected to that.
Yeah.
But life's pretty hardy. So it would be, I would think, if life really took on Mars and was abundant, it would be hard to erase all signatures. If there were just a couple little sprinklings of it and it never really took off, it might be harder to find. But 4 billion years is a long time for evolution of the crust, and it might be hard to find these fossils. The biosignatures are fossils, so we might have to dig down. And I think Perseverance is going to dig a little bit, but probably not too far. So we might have to wait until ExoMars launches the next year, and that'll dig down a little deeper, hopefully down to a meter.
Keep on digging. Yes.
That's right. Keep digging.
What next for you in your research following this paper? What do you hope to do? Are there big unanswered questions related to to the work on RSL? Where would you like to do next?
I think a couple things. One thing, I'll share this little picture. So this is sort of a diagram of what we think the soil particles might look like, with little snowflakes as ice grains and the blue ovals as sort of liquidy grains. So we'd like to pursue this some more with some more experiments. My postdoc, Merveille Silvas, has been doing the low temperature spectroscopy, and we've just written a couple of proposals to try to get funding to look at this a little more. And we're hoping to test different soils and different salts and concentrations of salts and see if we can better refine the conditions that support this kind of chemistry that might be happening in the subsurface. So,
okay.
I'm going to show another image here. This is a place where we have gullies near the top, and then we have RSL down lower. So this is a crater on Mars. It's called Krupak crater, and another astounding high-rise image of the surface. But you can see we see these debris flows or dust landslides always where there's a slope. So craters are a great example on Mars for that. We also see some of these in Antarctica, which was what got me thinking about this initially. But the way Antarctica is shaped, kind of like the crater behind me, this is Haleakala, but Antarctica has valleys. And so most of the salts are on the bottom of the valley, and then on the upward flanks, we see the RSL because of the slopes. But on Mars, the surface was in some places more flat, and then you have a meteorite come and carve out the center. So it's not in the places where the RSL are forming, mostly are on these impact crater walls. So it wasn't a valley system like this. It was more of a flat surface. So for that reason, we can see more activity on the crater walls, because it's not part of a valley necessarily. It was more of a flat area where you could have had the salts below the surface.
It's really good that the geology is commonplace, but similar on both planets, that you can actually mimic some of these conditions, and that gives you an idea of what's happening, on Mars, or even on other worlds that are even more inaccessible. And this comparative planetology, as it's called, to compare one planet to another and the similarities and differences, is a very, very powerful scientific tool.
Oh, definitely. And I think you kind of have to know a little bit about the planet you're studying. Like we're starting to learn more about Ceres and Bennu, and as we get more information about the composition and the characteristics, then we can look for analogs on Earth and try to study it more. But with Mars is so close, so we know a little more about Mars. So it's easier to find Mars analogs on the Earth because we already know more about Mars.
Good. Well, Janice, thank you so much for the conversation. We have much more information about your work on our website. Please do go to visit SETI.org. Thank you, everyone, wherever you are on planet Earth, from watching. Thank you very much for sending stars on Facebook. That is wonderful. SETI Institute is a non-profit organization, and we have these chats for free. So please do consider, if you can, to make a donation to the SETI Institute. Again, you can go to the website, and there's a very large red donate button, which we always appreciate people clicking. We'll have another SETI Live next week, and all the events that are coming up for the SETI Institute will be on our website. So please do take a look. So from me, Simon, and from Janice, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate your interest in science. Bye-bye.